Chapter 1. The Saints Whisper. What if the Vatican's holiest saints were not blessed by God, but bound by a curse that bleeds eternal? In the shadowed heart of Rome, on a rain-soaked night in October 1847, Father Lorenzo stumbled upon a secret that would shatter his faith. As lightning cracked the sky above St. Peter's Basilica, he stood frozen in the apostolic library, staring at a reliquary that should have been silent. Inside, the preserved hand of Saint Cecilia, patroness of music, twitched, its fingers curling as if beckoning him closer. A faint whisper melodic, inhuman slithered from the glass case, "Libero me, free me." Lorenzo, a young priest with a scholar's mind and a skeptic's heart, felt his knees buckle. He was no stranger to the Vatican's relics, but this was no miracle. The air grew heavy, laced with the metallic tang of blood, and the oil lamps flickered as if suffocated by an unseen presence. He clutched his rosary, its beads cold against his palm, and backed away. Only hours earlier, he'd been a junior archivist, tasked with sorting dusty papal records. But a chance discovery, a tattered note hidden in a 15th century breviary, had led him here, to the restricted vaults of the Apostolic Library, where secrets were locked behind iron and prayer. The note, written in a trembling hand, spoke of a Codex Sanctus Vacuus, the Book of the Hollow Saints. It claimed that certain saints, revered for their incorrupt bodies, were not divine but damned, their flesh sustained by a forbidden ritual. Lorenzo had dismissed it as medieval superstition, a relic of a less enlightened age. Yet the note's final words burned in his mind: "They walk among us, hungry, and the Church knows." Driven by a mix of curiosity and defiance, he'd stolen a key from the head librarian and slipped into the forbidden section under cover of night. Now, standing before a locked codex, its leather cover etched with a faint cross that seemed to pulse under the lamplight, Lorenzo hesitated. The whisper came again, sharper now, from the reliquary. "Apiri, open it." His hands shook as he forced the rusted clasp, the metal screeching like a scream in the silence. The pages crackled, revealing Latin text interspersed with strange symbols, pentagrams, eyes, and hands dripping with ink that looked too much like blood. The first passage read, "Sancti vacui non dormiunt. Sanguine vivant, et noct regnant." The hollow saints do not sleep. They live by blood and rule the night. Each page deepened the horror. The Codex documented saints whose bodies defied decay, their reliquaries stained with fresh blood, their voices heard in empty chapels. One account told of Saint Agnes, whose corpse was seen wandering the catacombs in 1623, her eyes glowing like embers. Another described a priest who vanished after touching Saint Cecilia's reliquary, his screams echoing through the Vatican's halls. Historical details anchored the tales: a 17th century cardinal's sealed letter, a 13th century chronicle of a bleeding saint in Trastevere. These were not fables but reports, signed by men of God who feared what they'd seen. The storm outside raged, thunder shaking the stone walls. Lorenzo's lantern cast long shadows, and he swore they moved, twisting into shapes that were not his own. A chill ran through him, not from the damp air but from a growing certainty: the Codex was no mere relic. It was a confession. The Church had known about these hollow saints for centuries, hiding their true nature to protect its flock or its power. A passage caught his eye, describing a ritual to bind these saints, requiring a sacrifice of blood and faith. The name Saint Cecilia appeared again, linked to a pact forged in the Vatican's earliest days, when Rome was still half pagan. A sudden thud broke his thoughts. The reliquary's glass rattled, and the hand inside pressed against it, the skin unnaturally pink, as if flushed with life. Lorenzo stumbled back, knocking over a stack of manuscripts. The whisper grew into a song, a haunting melody that filled the library, both beautiful and profane. His rational mind screamed for an explanation: hallucination, exhaustion, a trick of the storm, but his heart knew better. Something ancient and unholy was stirring, and he had awakened it. He grabbed the codex, clutching it like a shield, and ran toward the vault's iron door. The song followed, weaving through the shelves, its notes curling around his soul. As he reached the threshold, a final glance back revealed a shadow in the shape of a woman, her robes flowing, her eyes fixed on him. Was it Cecilia? Or something wearing her form? Lorenzo's faith faltered, but he whispered a prayer, slamming the door shut. The storm swallowed the sound, but not the dread that clung to him like damp cloth. He knew he couldn't stop now. The Codex held answers, and the Vatican's silence was proof of its fear. If the hollow saints were real, what did that mean for the church he served? For the God he worshipped? As he fled into the rain-soaked night, one question burned brighter than the lightning above: what had the Vatican done to keep these saints alive? If you're brave enough to follow Father Lorenzo into the Vatican's darkest secrets, share this story with someone who loves a good mystery. What would you do if you heard a saint whisper your name in the dead of night? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's uncover the truth together. Chapter 2. The Bleeding Wall. In the dead of night, beneath the sacred stones of St. Peter's Basilica, a crimson stain seeped from the walls of the necropolis, pooling like tears at Father Lorenzo's feet. It was October 1847, and the air in the Vatican's ancient catacombs hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and something sharper: blood, unmistakable, though no wound could be seen. Lorenzo's lantern trembled in his grip, casting jagged shadows that seemed to writhe against the carved crosses and faded epitaphs. Hours earlier, he had fled the apostolic library, the Codex Sanctus Vacuus clutched to his chest, its heretical pages branding his mind with whispers of hollow saints whose incorrupt bodies were no divine gift but a curse bound by blood. Now, driven by a reckless need to confront the truth, he stood in the forbidden necropolis, before the tomb of Saint Cecilia, named in the Codex as a vessel for something unholy. The crimson stain spread, defying gravity, crawling upward along the stone-like veins beneath skin. Lorenzo's breath caught, his Jesuit training warring with the primal dread that gripped him. He was no stranger to the Vatican's relics, but this was no miracle. The Codex had warned of Cecilia's tomb, a place where the line between sanctity and damnation blurred. Its pages spoke of a pact, a ritual that kept the hollow saints tethered to the earth, their bodies preserved by a hunger that mocked God's law. Lorenzo had stolen a key to enter this sacred crypt, its iron weight a guilty secret in his pocket, but the bleeding wall felt like a judgment for his trespass. He knelt before Cecilia's sarcophagus, its marble surface etched with lyres and doves, glowing faintly under his lantern's light. The Codex, tucked inside his cassock, seemed to pulse, as if alive. He opened it, the brittle pages crackling in the silence, and found a passage that chilled him: Sancti vacui sanguinem patunt, et muri eorum lacrimant. The hollow saints seek blood, and their walls weep. The text described how their presence could mark the very stones, a sign of their awakening. Historical echoes haunted him: a 16th-century Vatican record of a crypt flooded with blood, dismissed as a miracle of martyrdom, a 14th-century monk's account of walls that cried red near Cecilia's shrine, sealed away by papal decree. These were not fables but truths the Church had buried. The stain pulsed, and a low hum vibrated through the necropolis, not a choir but a single, mournful note, like a cello strung with despair. Lorenzo's crucifix felt cold, almost resistant, as he traced a protective line of holy water around the sarcophagus. The hum grew, and the crimson pool at his feet rippled, as if stirred by an unseen hand. He whispered Psalm 91, "You will not fear the terror of the night," but the words faltered as the sarcophagus groaned, its lid shifting slightly, dust cascading like ash. His heart pounded. The Codex had warned that the hollow saints could sense the living, their hunger drawn to faith as much as flesh. Had his presence here, his violation of the Vatican's secrets, awakened Cecilia? A sudden crack split the air, and the wall behind the sarcophagus splintered, revealing a hidden alcove. Within it, a reliquary gleamed, its glass encasing Cecilia's preserved hand pink, unnaturally vital, its fingers curled as if grasping for something. The crimson stain seemed to flow toward it, pooling beneath the glass like an offering. Lorenzo's mind raced for a rational explanation, perhaps a subterranean spring, tainted with iron, or a trick of the necropolis's damp air. But the hum sharpened into a whisper, soft and melodic, yet laced with malice: "Ego sum, I am." He stumbled back, his lantern clattering against the stone. The Codex fell open, its pages flipping to a drawing of a saintly figure, its hands dripping with blood, surrounded by weeping walls. A Latin note warned, "Cave fella sanguinem, beware the blood's call." The whisper grew, now a voice, distinctly Cecilia's, yet wrong, as if spoken through a throat choked with earth. Lorenzo's faith wavered. He was a priest, sworn to God's truth, but the Codex suggested the Vatican had forged a pact with something older, darker, to preserve its power. The reliquary's glass rattled, and the hand inside twitched, its fingers uncurling with a sickening slowness. A new sound emerged: soft, deliberate footsteps, echoing from the necropolis's depths. Lorenzo spun, his lantern barely piercing the gloom. The footsteps were heavy, purposeful, as if someone or something guarded this place. The Codex had mentioned protectors, bound to the hollow saints, but were they priests or something worse? He called out, "In nomine Christi, reveal yourself." The footsteps stopped, replaced by a low, guttural chuckle that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The crimson stain pulsed faster, and the reliquary's glass cracked, a single fracture snaking across its surface. The whisper became a command, a puri portum, "Open the gate." Lorenzo's eyes darted to the sarcophagus, where the lid had shifted further, revealing a sliver of darkness within. His hands shook as he clutched the Codex, its weight a reminder of the truth he'd sought and now regretted. The necropolis felt alive, its walls closing in, the air thick with the stench of blood and decay. He backed toward the iron gate, but the whisper followed, weaving through his mind, urging him to stay. As he reached the gate, a final glance revealed a shadow emerging from the sarcophagus, its form cloaked in robes, its face hidden but its presence heavy with menace. Lorenzo slammed the gate shut, the clang drowned by the storm raging outside, but the whisper lingered, curling around his soul like smoke. He'd come seeking answers, but found only a deeper mystery, one the Vatican had buried for centuries. If this tale of bleeding walls and unholy saints grips you, share it with a friend who loves a chilling mystery. If you stood before that weeping wall, would you dare touch the blood or flee its call? Tell us in the comments, and let's unravel this darkness together. Chapter 3. The Cardinal's Warning. A blood-red seal cracked open, its wax crumbling like bone under Cardinal Bellarmine's trembling fingers, revealing a letter that should have been burned centuries ago. In the flickering candlelight of his private chamber within the Vatican's Apostolic Palace, October 1847, the air was thick with the scent of melted tallow and old secrets. Father Lorenzo stood before the cardinal, his cassock still damp from the storm that had chased him from the necropolis, the Codex Sanctus Vacuus hidden beneath his robes. The memory of the bleeding wall and Saint Cecilia's shadow haunted him, her whispered command of Peri Portum, still echoing in his ears. He had come seeking answers, but the cardinal's gaunt face, etched with dread, suggested he was about to uncover something far worse. Bellarmine, an aging prelate with eyes like clouded glass, held the letter aloft, its parchment yellowed and brittle. "You should not have entered the necropolis, Father," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid the walls themselves could hear. "Some truths are better left buried." The letter, marked with a 16th-century papal seal, detailed a forbidden ritual, a pact to bind the hollow saints, those incorrupt bodies revered by the faithful but feared by the Church as vessels of an ancient curse. Lorenzo's heart pounded. The Codex had hinted at this pact, but to hear it confirmed by a cardinal, a guardian of the Church's sanctity, was a blasphemy that shook his faith. The chamber's walls, adorned with faded tapestries of saints and martyrs, seemed to close in, their woven eyes watching. Bellarmine's hands shook as he recounted a tale from 1623, when a Vatican scribe had vanished after reporting bloodstains in Cecilia's tomb, his journal later found with a single line, "She is not what she seems." The cardinal's voice dropped lower, recounting a 14th-century incident where a crypt's walls wept red, dismissed as a miracle but sealed by papal decree. These were not myths, he admitted, but truths the Church had suppressed to protect its flock or its power. "The hollow saints," he said, "are bound by blood, and your meddling risks awakening them." Lorenzo clutched his crucifix, its silver edges biting into his palm, and protested, "But why hide this? If these saints are cursed, the faithful deserve to know." Bellarmine's eyes narrowed, his face a mask of pity and fear. "You think truth brings salvation? It brings chaos. The pact was made to keep them dormant, to spare the world their hunger." He leaned closer, his breath sour with age. "Saint Cecilia is their anchor. Disturb her, and the others will rise." The cardinal's warning carried a weight that chilled Lorenzo, suggesting a conspiracy woven into the Vatican's very foundations. The candles flickered, casting shadows that seemed to twist into unnatural shapes: hands, faces, eyes. Lorenzo's mind raced, recalling the Codex's warning, Sancti vacui fidem devorant, the hollow saints devour faith. Was Cecilia's shadow in the necropolis a sign that the pact was weakening? Bellarmine's letter described the ritual requiring a living sacrifice, a soul offered to keep the saints bound. Historical whispers echoed in Lorenzo's thoughts, a 17th-century priest found drained of blood near Cecilia's shrine, his death blamed on bandits, a 15th-century nun who claimed Cecilia spoke to her, only to be silenced in a cloister. The Church had buried these events, but the Cardinal's words confirmed their reality. A sudden gust rattled the chamber's windows, and the candles guttered, plunging the room into near darkness. Bellarmine froze, his eyes darting to a corner where a tapestry swayed, as if brushed by an unseen hand. "They know you're here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The Guardians watch." Lorenzo's blood ran cold. The Codex had mentioned protectors, but Bellarmine's fear suggested they were more than human, perhaps extensions of the hollow saints themselves. A faint hum filled the air, not unlike the mournful note from the necropolis, but softer, more insidious, like a prayer spoken backward. Lorenzo pressed, "Who are these guardians? What is Cecilia?" Bellarmine's face paled, and he shoved the letter into Lorenzo's hands. "Burn it," he hissed. "And leave this path, or you'll join the others who sought the truth." The Cardinal's words were a blade, cutting through Lorenzo's resolve. He wanted to argue, to demand clarity, but the hum grew louder, and the tapestry moved again, its woven saints seeming to shift, their eyes gleaming with unnatural light. Lorenzo's lantern, forgotten on the floor, flickered as if starved of air. The letter in his hands felt heavy, its wax seal crumbling further, revealing a hidden symbol, a cross entwined with a serpent, a mark the Codex had linked to the pact. Bellarmine staggered back, clutching his chest, his breath ragged. "She sees you now," he gasped, his eyes fixed on the tapestry. Lorenzo followed his gaze and saw it, a shadow, tall and robed, emerging from the fabric, its form indistinct but its presence suffocating. The hum became a whisper, Cecilia's voice, cold and clear, "Queries me, you seek me." Lorenzo's faith wavered, but he gripped the Codex, its pages a lifeline to the truth he couldn't abandon. He fled the chamber, the letter and Codex clutched to his chest, the whisper chasing him down the marble corridors. The Cardinal's warning rang in his ears, but so did Cecilia's voice, pulling him toward her tomb. The Vatican was a labyrinth of secrets, and he was now its prey. If this chilling tale of hidden pacts and unholy saints grips you, hit that like button to join Father Lorenzo's quest. If you faced a cardinal's warning to abandon the truth, would you burn the letter or keep searching? Share your choice in the comments, and let's uncover what lies ahead. Chapter 4. The Haunting of Cecilia's Tomb. A frozen scream hung in the air, carved into the marble face of an angel above Saint Cecilia's tomb, its stone eyes wide with terror as if witnessing an unspeakable act. In the shadowed Basilica of Santa Cecilia in Trastevere, Rome, on a moonless night in October 1847, Father Lorenzo stood before the saint's shrine, his lantern casting a trembling glow across the ancient stone. The Codex Sanctus Vacuus, still hidden in his cassock, burned against his chest, its warnings of hollow saints whose incorrupt bodies were bound by a cursed pact echoing in his mind. The blood-soaked wall in the necropolis and Cardinal Bellarmine's dire warning had driven him here, to the heart of Cecilia's sanctuary, where whispers of her unholy presence had lingered for centuries. The air was thick with the scent of incense and decay, and the silence was broken by a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on bone. Lorenzo's hands shook as he traced the angel's carved scream, its expression a mirror of his own dread. He had fled the cardinal's chamber, Bellarmine's words, "She sees you now," chasing him through the Vatican's corridors. The Codex had named Cecilia as the anchor of the hollow saints, her tomb a nexus of their cursed power. Historical accounts flooded his thoughts, a 17th-century nun's diary, found in the Vatican archives, describing screams heard from Cecilia's shrine at midnight, dismissed as hysteria, a 15th-century report of a priest who entered the basilica and was never seen again, his rosary found shattered on the floor. The church had buried these stories, but the angel's frozen scream suggested they were more than legend. The tapping grew louder, emanating from the marble sarcophagus at the shrine's center. Lorenzo's crucifix felt heavy, its silver warm as if warning him to flee. He whispered a prayer, "Domini, salva me," but the words felt fragile against the oppressive darkness. The Codex had described Cecilia's tomb as a place where the pact was sealed, a ritual that bound her to the earth with blood and faith. He approached the sarcophagus, its surface etched with faded lyres, and noticed a faint red stain seeping from its edges, like the weeping wall in the necropolis. His heart pounded. Was this another sign of her awakening, or a trick of his exhausted mind? He opened the Codex, its pages fluttering as if stirred by a breath. A passage caught his eye, "Sancti vacui in umbris regnant, et eorum sepulchra porti sunt." The hollow saints rule in shadows, and their tombs are gates. The text warned that Cecilia's shrine was a threshold, a portal through which the cursed saints could reach the living. Lorenzo's Jesuit training urged him to dismiss it as superstition, but the tapping became a pounding, and the sarcophagus trembled, its lid shifting with a low groan. Dust cascaded, and a cold wind, sour with the stench of blood, swept through the basilica, snuffing out half the candles lining the walls. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision, swift and robed, vanishing behind a column. Lorenzo spun, his lantern casting wild shadows that seemed to twist into human forms, hands outstretched, eyes hollow. "In nomine Christi," he shouted, clutching his crucifix, but the shadow reappeared, closer now, its form indistinct but its presence heavy, like a weight on his soul. The Codex had mentioned guardians, protectors of the hollow saints, but this felt different, less human, more like an echo of Cecilia herself. The pounding intensified, and a crack split the sarcophagus, revealing a sliver of darkness within, pulsing with a faint, unnatural light. Lorenzo's mind raced, recalling a 16th-century Vatican record of a shadow saint seen in Trastevere, blamed on demonic possession but sealed in the archives. The Church had called it a miracle to quell panic, but the Codex suggested otherwise, a truth hidden to protect its authority. The shadow lunged, a blur of robes and glowing eyes, stopping just beyond his lantern's light. A voice, soft and melodic yet laced with malice, filled the basilica, "Tu es meus, you are mine." It was Cecilia's voice, the same that had haunted him in the necropolis, now stronger, more commanding. He poured a circle of holy water around himself, a barrier taught by his mentors, but the shadow circled, undeterred, its eyes burning through the gloom. The codex fell open to a drawing a figure in saintly robes, its face a void, standing before a cracked tomb. A Latin note warned, "Cave fellis umbras, beware the shadow's embrace." Lorenzo's faith faltered. Was Cecilia a saint, or a vessel for something older, something the Vatican had bargained with to secure its power? The pounding stopped, replaced by a low hum, like a hymn sung in reverse, and the sarcophagus's lid slid further, revealing a glimpse of Cecilia's preserved body, her face serene, yet her lips stained with fresh blood. A new sound broke the hum: footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing from the basilica's nave. Lorenzo turned, his lantern barely piercing the darkness, but the footsteps were unmistakable, joined by a metallic clink, like a chain dragging across stone. The codex had warned of guardians, but who or what approached? His voice trembled as he called, "Show yourself in God's name." The footsteps halted, and a guttural chuckle answered, chillingly familiar from the necropolis. The shadow before him vanished, but the hum grew louder, and the blood stain on the sarcophagus spread, pooling at his feet. Lorenzo snatched the codex and backed toward the basilica's door, his eyes fixed on the sarcophagus. As he reached the threshold, a final glance revealed Cecilia's body rising, her glowing eyes locking onto his, her blood-stained lips curling into a smile. The hum became a scream, shattering the remaining candle's flames, plunging the basilica into darkness. Lorenzo fled into the night, the codex his only anchor, knowing he'd crossed a line from which there was no return. If this tale of haunted tombs and unholy saints chills you, share it with someone who dares to face the dark. If you saw that blood-stained smile, would you pray for Cecilia's soul or run from her gaze? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's see how deep this mystery goes. Chapter 5. The Unholy Pact. A single drop of blood fell from the chalice, staining the ancient altar with a hiss, as if the stone itself recoiled in horror. In the crypt beneath the Basilica of Santa Cecilia in Trastevere, on a frost-bitten night in October 1847, Father Lorenzo stood frozen, his lantern illuminating a hidden shrine that should not exist. The Codex Sanctus Vacuus, still clutched in his trembling hands, had led him here after his terrifying encounter with Saint Cecilia's rising form, her blood-stained smile searing his memory. The cardinal's warning, "She sees you now," and the weeping walls of the necropolis had driven him to the secret chamber, where the air was thick with the stench of iron and decay, and the walls bore faded sigils that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat from the earth. Lorenzo's breath clouded in the frigid air as he examined the altar, its surface scarred with grooves that channeled blood into a stone basin below. The Codex had hinted at a pact, a ritual that bound the hollow saints to the Vatican, preserving their incorrupt bodies with a price too terrible to name. He had fled Cecilia's tomb, her glowing eyes and whispered claim to es meus, chasing him through the basilica's darkened nave. Now, in this hidden crypt, he sought answers, driven by a mix of dread and defiance. The Codex, its pages brittle and stained, lay open before him, revealing a passage that made his blood run cold: "Pactum sanguinis in tenebris factum est, ut sancti vacui vivant." The blood pact was made in darkness, that the hollow saints might live. The text described a ritual from the Vatican's earliest days, when Rome teetered between paganism and Christianity. To secure the Church's power, a council of shadowy clerics had struck a deal with an ancient force, offering blood to bind certain saints' vessels like Cecilia to the earth, their bodies preserved as guardians of a secret faith. Historical whispers haunted Lorenzo's mind, a 13th century chronicle of a blood altar found beneath Rome, sealed by papal order, a 16th century report of a priest who vanished after uncovering a hidden shrine, his journal marked with the same sigils now before Lorenzo's eyes. The Church had called these miracles or heresies, burying them to protect its sanctity. The sigils on the walls glowed brighter, their light casting twisted shadows that seemed to writhe like serpents. Lorenzo's crucifix felt heavy, its silver edges biting into his palm as he whispered a prayer, Domini, libero me a malo, but the words were drowned by a low hum, like a chant spoken in a tongue he didn't know. The Codex warned that the pact required a living sacrifice, a soul offered to sustain the hollow saint's curse. Was this why Cecilia's tomb had stirred? Had his presence, his probing of the Codex, renewed the ritual's hunger? The blood in the basin rippled, though no wind stirred the crypt, and a faint whisper echoed, Cecilia's voice, cold and commanding, sanguis meus, my blood. Lorenzo stumbled back, his lantern flickering as the hum grew into a pulse, shaking the altar. The Codex fell open to a drawing a robed figure, its face a void, pouring blood into a chalice, surrounded by kneeling priests. A Latin note warned, Cave felis pactum, beware the pact's price. His rational mind scrambled for an explanation. Perhaps the blood was a relic, preserved by some natural quirk, or the sigils were mere carvings. But the pulse quickened, and the shadows thickened, forming shapes that slithered toward him, their forms half human, half something else. The Codex had mentioned guardians, protectors of the pact, but these felt like extensions of Cecilia herself, bound to her curse. A sudden crack split the air, and the altar's basin overflowed, blood spilling onto the stone floor, pooling at Lorenzo's feet. His heart pounded as he traced a line of holy water around himself, a barrier against evil, but the shadows pressed closer, undeterred, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural light he'd seen in Cecilia's tomb. The whisper grew louder, now a chorus of voices, all Cecilia's, chanting in unison, offer, offer. Lorenzo's faith wavered. Was the church he served built on this unholy bargain? Had it traded souls for power, cloaking its sin in the guise of miracles? A new sound emerged, slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing from the crypt's entrance, accompanied by the clink of metal, like a blade being drawn. Lorenzo spun, his lantern barely piercing the gloom, but the footsteps were unmistakable, heavy with purpose. The Codex had warned of guardians, but this felt different, as if the pact itself had summoned a protector. In nomine Dei, he shouted, his voice trembling, but the footsteps grew closer, and a low growl answered, chillingly inhuman. The blood pool pulsed, and the sigils flared, illuminating a figure in the shadows, robed, faceless, its hands dripping with crimson. Lorenzo clutched the Codex, its weight a reminder of the truth he couldn't abandon. He backed toward the crypt's exit, the chant growing deafening, the blood rising like a tide. As he reached the stone stairs, a final glance revealed the figure stepping into the light, its face hidden but its presence suffocating, holding a chalice that gleamed with fresh blood. The whisper became a scream, "You cannot break us." Lorenzo fled, the codex his only anchor, knowing he'd uncovered a truth that could destroy the church or himself. If this tale of blood pacts and hidden altars grips you, comment below with your thoughts on what Lorenzo should do next. Would you dare to touch that cursed chalice or destroy it forever? Let us know, and subscribe to uncover the next chapter of this unholy mystery. Chapter 6. The Exorcist's Confession. A tattered journal, its pages scorched as if kissed by hellfire, lay open on a dust-covered table in a forgotten Vatican cloister, its words accusing the Church of a sin too grave to speak aloud. In the dim light of a single candle, on a storm-ravaged night in October 1847, Father Lorenzo stood in the cloister's shadowed chamber, his heart pounding as he read the forbidden text. The Codex Sanctus Vacuus, still hidden in his cassock, had led him here after his harrowing escape from the blood-soaked altar beneath Santa Cecilia's Basilica, where the hollow saint's pact had revealed its crimson price. The memory of Cecilia's rising form and the faceless guardian's chalice haunted him, their whispered command, "You cannot break us," echoing in his ears. Now, seeking refuge in this abandoned cloister, he had stumbled upon the journal of Father Gregorio, a long-dead exorcist whose name the Vatican had erased from its annals. The journal's leather cover was charred, its edges crumbling like ash, as if someone had tried and failed to destroy it. Lorenzo's lantern cast a trembling glow across the cloister, its stone walls damp with the scent of mold and despair. The air was heavy, as if the room itself held its breath, and the faint sound of dripping water mingled with the distant howl of the storm outside. The Codex had hinted at guardians protecting the hollow saints, but Gregorio's journal told a darker tale, an exorcist who had faced Cecilia and lived, only to be silenced by the church he served. Lorenzo's fingers trembled as he turned the pages, each one stained with ink that looked too much like blood. Gregorio's words were a confession, scrawled in a frantic hand: "Ego vidi sanctam, et non erat sancta. Diabolus in ea habitat." I saw the saint, and she was not holy. The devil dwells within her. The journal recounted a night in 1782, when Gregorio was summoned to Cecilia's tomb after reports of screams and flickering lights. He had performed an exorcism, expecting a demon, but found something worse: a saint whose body moved, her eyes glowing with a hunger that mocked God's grace. The ritual failed, and Gregorio barely escaped, his faith shattered. Historical echoes chilled Lorenzo, a 17th-century Vatican record of an exorcist vanishing after a failed rite in Trastevere, his name struck from church records, a 15th-century account of a cloister sealed after unholy rites, dismissed as heresy. The church had buried these truths, but Gregorio's journal was proof they lived. The candle flickered, its flame bending as if pressed by an unseen hand. Lorenzo's crucifix felt cold, almost resistant, as he whispered a prayer: Domini, de mei fortitudinem, but the words were drowned by a low moan, like a sob trapped in stone. The journal described the ritual to break the hollow saint's pact, hidden in a forbidden text called the Liber Tenebris. Gregorio had sought it, only to be hunted by the guardian's figures, neither human nor demon, bound to Cecilia's curse. The moan grew louder, and the cloister's walls seemed to pulse, their shadows twisting into shapes that clawed at the edges of Lorenzo's vision. He turned a page, and a drawing stopped his breath: a robed figure, its face a void, holding a chalice that dripped blood, surrounded by kneeling priests. A Latin note warned, "Cave fellis confessio, beware the confession's cost." Lorenzo's mind raced. Was the Liber Tenebris real? Could it hold the key to breaking Cecilia's hold? The Codex had warned that the hollow saints fed on faith, their power tied to the Vatican's pact. Had Gregorio's failure been a warning, or a guide? The moan became a whisper, Cecilia's voice, soft and venomous, quid queries, what do you seek? A sudden crack split the air, and the journal's pages tore, as if ripped by invisible hands. Lorenzo stumbled back, his lantern clattering to the floor, its light flickering wildly. The shadows thickened, forming figures that slithered along the walls, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural light he'd seen in Cecilia's tomb. His holy water vial, tucked in his pocket, felt warm, as if warning him of danger. He traced a protective circle around himself, but the shadows pressed closer, their whispers joining Cecilia's, "De me, give me." Lorenzo's faith trembled. Was the church he served complicit in this horror, silencing those like Gregorio who dared to challenge it? A new sound emerged, slow, heavy footsteps, echoing from the cloister's entrance, accompanied by the scrape of metal, like a blade dragging across stone. Lorenzo's heart pounded as he called out, "In nomine Christi, show yourself." The footsteps stopped, replaced by a guttural laugh, chillingly familiar from the necropolis and basilica. The shadows surged, and the candle's flame snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness. Lorenzo clutched the journal, its pages crumpling under his grip, and fumbled for his lantern. As he relit it, the light revealed a figure in the doorway, robed, faceless, its hands clutching a tattered book, its cover marked with the same sigils as the altars. The whisper became a scream, "Ego te video. I see you." Lorenzo's courage faltered, but he couldn't turn back. The journal was his only lead to the Liber Tenebris, and with it, a chance to end the Hollow Saint's curse. He fled the cloister, journal and codex in hand, the scream chasing him through the stone corridors. The Vatican's secrets were unraveling, and he was now their target. If this tale of forbidden confessions and unholy guardians grips you, share it with a friend who loves a dark mystery. If you found that scorched journal, would you read its secrets or burn it to ash? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's uncover the next chapter of this chilling saga. Chapter 7. The Blood of the Saint. A cursed prayer, whispered in the dark, burned Father Lorenzo's lips as he recited words he swore never to speak, each syllable tasting of ash and betrayal. In the shadowed sacristy of the Basilica of Santa Cecilia in Trastevere, on a frost-bitten night in October 1847, the air was thick with the scent of wax and something fouler blood, seeping from the unseen. The Codex Sanctus Vacuus, clutched in his trembling hands, had driven him back to Cecilia's shrine after his flight from the scorched journal of Father Gregorio, the exorcist whose confession revealed the Hollow Saint's unholy truth. The memory of Cecilia's blood-stained smile and the faceless guardian's scream, "Ego te video," haunted him, urging him to this sacred yet cursed place, where the line between faith and damnation blurred. Lorenzo's lantern cast a feeble glow across the sacristy, its walls lined with faded vestments and silver reliquaries that gleamed like eyes in the dark. The Codex had hinted at a ritual to break the Hollow Saint's pact, hidden in the Liber Tenebris, but Gregorio's journal warned that such knowledge came at a cost, a curse that bound the seeker to the saint's hunger. Lorenzo had found no trace of the forbidden book, but the journal's final page had revealed a prayer, not of salvation but of summoning, said to awaken Cecilia's power. Desperate for answers, he had whispered it, his voice trembling, Sancta Cecilia, sanguine tuo, aperi veritatem, Saint Cecilia, by your blood, reveal the truth. Now, the sacristy felt alive, its silence broken by a faint drip, like blood falling on stone. The drip grew louder, and Lorenzo's gaze fell on a reliquary atop a stone altar, a silver case housing Cecilia's preserved finger, its flesh unnaturally pink, as if flushed with life. To his horror, a single drop of blood welled from the relic, sliding down the silver and pooling on the altar with a hiss. His crucifix burned against his chest, as if rejecting the prayer he'd spoken. The Codex had warned that the hollow saints fed on blood and faith, their curse sustained by a pact forged in the Vatican's shadows. Historical whispers echoed in his mind, a 16th-century account of a sacristan found dead in Trastevere, his body drained of blood, blamed on a plague, a 14th-century report of a reliquary weeping red, sealed by papal order. The Church had called these miracles, but Lorenzo knew they were lies. The blood pool spread, defying gravity, creeping toward him like a living thing. Lorenzo's prayer faltered, his faith warring with the dread that gripped him. The Codex, open at his feet, revealed a passage, Sanguis sancti est clavis, sed entium maledictum. The saint's blood is the key, but also the curse. It described how Cecilia's relics could unlock the pact's secrets, but only at the cost of the seeker's soul. The drip became a steady stream, and the reliquary trembled, its silver case rattling as if something inside fought to escape. Shadows danced across the walls, forming shapes, hands, eyes, mouths that seemed to whisper in Cecilia's voice, Mia mies, you are mine. Lorenzo's lantern flickered, its flame bending as if pressed by an unseen force. He traced a circle of holy water around himself, a barrier against evil, but the blood pool surged, crossing the line with a sizzle, as if mocking his faith. His mind raced for a rational explanation, perhaps a hidden spring, tainted with iron, or a trick of the sacristy's damp air. But the shadows thickened, their whispers growing into a chant, low and guttural, like a hymn sung in reverse. The Codex had warned of guardians, but these felt like extensions of Cecilia herself, bound to her blood. A sudden crack split the air, and the reliquary's case shattered, shards glinting like knives in the dim light. Cecilia's finger twitched, its nail scraping the silver, drawing fresh blood that dripped faster, pooling at Lorenzo's feet. A new sound emerged, slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing from the sacristy's entrance, accompanied by a soft clink, like a rosary bead striking stone. Lorenzo spun, his lantern barely piercing the gloom, but the footsteps were unmistakable, heavy with menace. The Codex had spoken of protectors, but this felt like something older, summoned by the cursed prayer he dared to speak. In nomine Dei, he shouted, his voice breaking, but the footsteps grew closer, and a low growl answered, chillingly inhuman. The blood pool pulsed, and the shadows surged, forming a figure robed, faceless, its hands dripping with crimson, holding a silver chalice that gleamed with unnatural light. Lorenzo's faith crumbled, but he clutched the codex, its pages his only anchor to the truth he sought. The chant grew deafening, and the blood rose like a tide, lapping at his boots. He backed toward the sacristy's door, the guardian's growl echoing in his ears. As he reached the threshold, a final glance revealed Cecilia's finger rising from the shattered reliquary, pointing directly at him, its blood forming a symbol on the altar, a cross entwined with a serpent, the mark of the pact. The whisper became a scream, "You have called me." Lorenzo fled into the night, codex and journal in hand, knowing he'd unleashed a curse that could consume him or the church itself. If this tale of cursed prayers and bleeding relics haunts you, hit that subscribe button to follow Lorenzo's fight against the darkness. If you faced that blood-soaked finger, would you finish the prayer or cast it aside? Share your choice in the comments, and let's unravel this unholy mystery together. Chapter 8. The first victim. A lifeless hand, pale as marble, reached from the shadows of the Vatican's Sistine Chapel, its fingers smeared with blood that glistened under the moonlight streaming through the stained glass windows. On a storm-torn night in October 1847, Father Lorenzo stood frozen in the chapel's sacred silence, his lantern trembling as it illuminated the crumpled body of Brother Matteo, a young sacristan, lying beneath Michelangelo's Last Judgment. The Codex Sanctus Vacuus, clutched in Lorenzo's hands, pulsed with a weight that seemed to grow heavier with each step he took into the Vatican's darkness. The cursed prayer he had spoken in the sacristy, the blood-soaked finger of Saint Cecilia pointing at him, and the exorcist's scorched journal all burned in his memory, their warnings of the hollow saint's hunger now made flesh in Matteo's lifeless form. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the faint scent of incense, clinging to the chapel's frescoed walls like a shroud. Matteo's neck bore 2 jagged wounds, as if torn by teeth, his eyes wide with terror, staring at the painted angels above. Lorenzo's crucifix felt like ice against his chest, a silent rebuke for the forbidden prayer that had awakened Cecilia's curse. The Codex had warned that the hollow saints fed on blood and faith, their pact sustained by sacrifices the Church had hidden for centuries. Lorenzo's flight from the sacristy had led him here, seeking refuge in the holiest of places, but the chapel felt desecrated, its sanctity shattered by the horror before him. He knelt beside Matteo, his hands shaking as he closed the sacristan's eyes, whispering a prayer, Requiem aeternam dona eis, but the words felt hollow, drowned by a faint hum, like a hymn sung in a forgotten tongue. The Codex, open at his feet, revealed a chilling passage, Primus victima est signum, sanguis eorum vocet alios. The first victim is a sign, their blood calls the others. It described how the hollow saints marked their prey, their hunger spreading like a plague. Historical whispers flooded Lorenzo's mind, a 15th-century Vatican record of a sacristan found drained in the Sistine Chapel, blamed on a rogue assassin, a 17th-century chronicle of a bleeding death near Cecilia's shrine, dismissed as a miracle gone wrong. The Church had buried these truths, but Matteo's body was proof they could no longer be ignored. The hum grew louder, and the shadows beneath the frescoes stirred, their edges curling like smoke. Lorenzo's lantern flickered, its light bending as if pressed by an unseen force. He traced a line of holy water around himself, a desperate barrier, but the blood on Matteo's neck glistened, as if still fresh, and a faint pulse rippled through it, defying death. The Codex had warned of guardians, protectors of the hollow saints, but this felt like Cecilia's presence, her curse now claiming lives. A soft scrape echoed from the chapel's apse, like nails on stone, and Lorenzo's heart pounded as he turned, his light catching a shadow robed, faceless, its eyes glowing with the same unnatural light he'd seen in Cecilia's tomb. The shadow vanished, but the hum became a whisper, Cecilia's voice, cold and commanding, sanguis meus te elegit, my blood has chosen you. Lorenzo's faith wavered, his mind scrambling for a rational explanation. Perhaps Matteo had been attacked by a madman, or the wounds were a trick of the light. But the blood pulsed again, and the shadows thickened, forming shapes that slithered along the walls, their forms half human, half nightmare. The Codex had hinted at a ritual to break the pact, hidden in the Liber Tenebris, but Lorenzo had no clue where to find it, and now a life had been lost because of his quest. A sudden crack split the air, and the stained glass window above shattered, shards raining down like tears. The moonlight poured in, illuminating Matteo's body, and to Lorenzo's horror, the sacristan's hand twitched, its fingers curling as if reaching for him. The whisper grew into a chant, Cecilia's voice joined by others, a chorus of hollow saints, unus cadit, plures surgent, one falls, more will rise. Lorenzo stumbled back, his lantern clattering to the floor, its flame nearly extinguished. The Codex fell open to a drawing saint with glowing eyes, standing over a body, its neck torn, surrounded by shadows. A Latin note warned, Cave Felis Primum, beware the first's call. A new sound emerged, slow, heavy footsteps, echoing from the chapel's entrance, accompanied by a metallic clank, like a chain dragging across marble. Lorenzo spun, his light barely piercing the gloom, but the footsteps were unmistakable, deliberate, as if drawn by the blood. The Codex had spoken of guardians, but this felt like something summoned by Matteo's death, a new predator in Cecilia's service. In nomine Christi, Lorenzo shouted, his voice breaking, but the footsteps grew closer, and a guttural laugh answered, chillingly familiar from the sacristy and necropolis. The blood on Matteo's neck pulsed faster, and the shadows surged, their eyes fixed on Lorenzo. He snatched the Codex and fled toward the chapel's door, the chant deafening, the blood seeming to follow him like a tide. As he reached the threshold, a final glance revealed Matteo's body rising, his eyes glowing with the same unholy light as Cecilia's, his blood-stained hand reaching out. The scream of the hollow saints filled the air, you cannot hide. Lorenzo ran into the storm, Codex in hand, knowing the curse had claimed its first victim and he was next. If this tale of blood and betrayal in the Vatican's heart chills you, hit that like button to join Lorenzo's desperate fight. If you saw that body rise, would you try to save its soul or run for your life? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's unravel this unholy horror together. Chapter 9. The Vatican's Silence. A silver key, etched with a serpent-entwined cross, gleamed with an unholy light in Father Lorenzo's trembling hand, as if it burned with the weight of the Vatican's darkest secrets. In the cold, cavernous hall of the Apostolic Palace, on a rain-soaked night in October 1847, the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and fading incense, the silence broken only by the distant toll of a bell. Lorenzo's heart pounded, still reeling from the horror of Brother Matteo's blood-drained body rising in the Sistine Chapel, its glowing eyes mirroring Saint Cecilia's. The Codex Sanctus Vacuus, tucked inside his cassock, and the scorched journal of Father Gregorio weighed heavy, their warnings of the hollow saint's hunger now undeniable after Matteo's death. Driven by desperation, Lorenzo had sought out the Council of Cardinals, hoping to expose the unholy pact, but the key slipped to him by an unseen hand as he fled the chapel promised a truth the Church had buried for centuries. The hall's marble walls, adorned with faded frescoes of saints, seemed to watch him, their painted eyes glinting in the lantern's flicker. The key, left at the chapel's threshold, bore the same sigil as the blood altar and Gregorio's journal, a mark of the pact that bound Cecilia and the hollow saints. Lorenzo's crucifix felt like ice, a silent rebuke for the cursed prayer he'd spoken, which had unleashed Matteo's fate. He had come to the apostolic palace to confront the council, but the chamber was empty, its long table littered with sealed scrolls and a single candle, its flame bending as if pressed by an unseen presence. The silence was oppressive, as if the Vatican itself held its breath, guarding its secrets. Lorenzo approached the table, his boots echoing on the marble floor, and noticed a scroll marked with the serpent cross sigil. His hands shook as he broke its wax seal, revealing a letter in Latin, penned in a trembling hand, Silentium est salus ecclesiae. Silence is the Church's salvation. The letter, dated 1623, confessed that the council had known of the hollow saints, their incorrupt bodies sustained by a blood pact to protect the Vatican's power. It detailed a decree to silence any who uncovered the truth, citing a 15th-century priest found dead after speaking of Cecilia's unholy gaze, and a 17th-century sacristan whose bloodless body was buried in secret. These were not accidents but sacrifices, the letter admitted, to keep the saints dormant. The candle's flame flickered wildly, casting shadows that twisted into robed figures along the walls. Lorenzo's breath caught, his mind racing with historical echoes, a 14th-century Vatican archive noting a sealed council that vanished after investigating Cecilia's shrine, dismissed as plague victims, a 16th-century chronicle of a cardinal who burned his own records, claiming the saints see all. The Church had woven a tapestry of lies, cloaking its sins in miracles. The Codex had warned that the hollow saints fed on faith, their pact a chain that bound both the Church and its victims. Was the Council complicit, or were they, too, prisoners of Cecilia's curse? A low hum filled the hall, like a chant from a forgotten rite, and the shadows thickened, their forms slithering closer. Lorenzo clutched the key, its edges biting into his palm, and whispered a prayer Domini, protege me, but the hum grew into a whisper, Cecilia's voice, cold and venomous, Silentium tuum, your silence. The scroll trembled in his hands, its ink seeming to pulse, as if alive. The Codex, still hidden in his cassock, felt warm, its pages stirring as if eager to reveal more. A passage caught his eye, clavis apparit, sed entium damnat. The key opens, but also damns. It described a hidden vault beneath the Vatican, sealed by the serpent cross, where the truth of the pact and perhaps the liber tenebris lay buried. A sudden crack split the air, and the candle snuffed out, plunging the hall into darkness. Lorenzo's lantern flickered, its light barely piercing the gloom. The shadows surged, their eyes glowing with the same unholy light as Cecilia's, and the whisper became a command, "Aperi, open." He stumbled back, his holy water vial shattering on the floor, its contents sizzling as if burned by the marble. The key burned hotter, as if urging him to act, but his faith wavered. Was the council's silence a sin, or a desperate bid to protect the faithful? The hum grew deafening, and the shadows closed in, their forms now distinct robed figures, faceless, their hands dripping with blood. A new sound emerged, slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing from the hall's far end, accompanied by a metallic scrape, like a blade on stone. Lorenzo spun, his lantern catching a glint of silver, a robed figure, its face hidden, holding a key identical to his own. The Codex had warned of guardians, but this felt like a betrayer, a member of the council itself. "In nomine Christi," Lorenzo shouted, his voice trembling, but the figure laughed, a guttural sound that echoed through the hall. The shadows chanted, Cecilia's voice leading them, "You are ours." Lorenzo clutched the codex and key, his only anchors to the truth he sought. He fled toward the hall's exit, the chant pursuing him, the key burning like a brand in his hand. As he reached the door, a final glance revealed the figure raising its key, its eyes glowing with Cecilia's light, and the shadows merging into a single form, a robed saint, its face a void, standing over the table. The scream filled the air, "The vault awaits." Lorenzo ran into the storm, knowing the key would lead him deeper into the Vatican's darkness or to his doom. If this tale of hidden vaults and unholy silence grips you, share it with a friend who dares to face the truth. If you held that cursed key, would you unlock the vault or cast it away? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's uncover the next chapter of this chilling mystery. Chapter 10. The Forbidden Vault. A rusted iron door, etched with sigils that pulsed like dying embers, groaned open to reveal a darkness that seemed to breathe with malice. In the deepest underbelly of the Vatican, beneath the Apostolic Palace, on a frost-choked night in October 1847, Father Lorenzo stood trembling, the silver key with its serpent-entwined cross burning in his hand. The Codex Sanctus Vacuus, tucked inside his cassock, felt alive, its pages thrumming after his escape from the council's chamber, where the robed saints screamed, "The vault awaits," had chased him into the storm. The blood-drained body of Brother Matteo, Cecilia's glowing eyes, and the scorched journal of Father Gregorio weighed heavy on his soul, each horror pointing to this forbidden vault, where the truth of the hollow saints' pact lay buried. The air was thick with the stench of damp earth and something sharper, blood, seeping from unseen cracks in the stone. Lorenzo's lantern cast a feeble glow across the vault's entrance, its walls carved with faded Latin inscriptions and symbols that matched the Codex's warnings. The key, slipped to him by an unseen hand, had led him here, to a place the Church had sealed centuries ago. His crucifix felt heavy, as if resisting the darkness ahead, a silent rebuke for the cursed prayer that had awakened Cecilia's hunger. The Codex had described this vault as the heart of the pact, where the Liber Tenebris, the book to break the hollow saint's curse, might be hidden. But the council's silence and Matteo's death warned of a price too terrible to pay. Lorenzo's breath clouded in the frigid air as he inserted the key, the lock grinding with a sound like bones snapping. The door swung open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into blackness, its steps slick with moisture that glistened red under his lantern's light. The codex, open in his trembling hands, revealed a passage, in profundo vault, veritas dormit, sed monstra vigilant. In the deep vault, truth sleeps, but monsters wake. It described a chamber where the pact was forged, sealed with blood to bind Cecilia and her kind. Historical echoes haunted Lorenzo, a 14th century Vatican record of a sealed crypt where priests vanished, their screams dismissed as madness, a 16th century chronicle of a vault uncovered beneath Rome, its contents burned by papal order. The Church had hidden these truths, but the key burned hotter, urging him downward. The staircase seemed endless, each step echoing with a faint hum, like a chant from a forgotten rite. The walls pulsed, their sigils glowing with an unnatural light, and the air grew colder, carrying a metallic tang that choked him. Lorenzo whispered a prayer, Domini, dirige me, but the words were drowned by a whisper, Cecilia's voice, soft and venomous, enter. His lantern flickered, its flame bending as if pressed by an unseen hand. At the staircase's end, he found a vast chamber, its floor inlaid with a mosaic of a serpent-entwined cross, its center stained with dried blood. Shelves lined the walls, filled with forbidden texts, their leather covers cracked and pulsing, as if alive. Lorenzo's heart pounded as he approached a stone pedestal, where a single book lay, the Liber Tenebris, its cover marked with the same sigils as the vault. The Codex had warned that opening it could break the pact, but at the cost of the seeker's soul. A drawing in the Codex showed a priest holding the book, his face a void, surrounded by robed shadows. A Latin note warned, Cave Fellis Liber, beware the book's embrace. The hum grew louder, and the mosaic's blood stain pulsed, as if feeding on his presence. Lorenzo's faith wavered. Was the Liber Tenebris salvation, or a trap set by Cecilia's curse? A sudden crack split the air, and the pedestal trembled, dust cascading like ash. The shadows on the walls thickened, forming figures robed, faceless, their eyes glowing with Cecilia's light. The whisper became a chant, Upperus, you open. Lorenzo's holy water vial, tucked in his pocket, shattered, its contents sizzling on the floor, as if rejected by the vault. The shadows surged, their hands dripping with blood, reaching for him. He clutched the Codex, its pages flipping to a passage warning of guardians, entities bound to protect the vault, neither human nor demon, but extensions of the hollow saint's hunger. A new sound emerged, slow, heavy footsteps, echoing from the staircase above, accompanied by a metallic clank, like a chain dragging across stone. Lorenzo spun, his lantern barely piercing the gloom, but the footsteps were unmistakable, deliberate, as if drawn by the Liber Tenebris. In nomine Christi, he shouted, his voice breaking, but the footsteps grew closer, and a guttural laugh answered, chillingly familiar from the Sistine Chapel. The shadows chanted louder, Cecilia's voice leading them, you are bound. Lorenzo reached for the Liber Tenebris, his hand trembling, but the book pulsed, its cover warm as if alive. The footsteps stopped, and a figure emerged from the staircase, robed, its face hidden, holding a chalice that dripped blood, its eyes glowing with unholy light. The chant became a scream, the pact claims you. Lorenzo stumbled back, Codex and key in hand, knowing he'd found the truth, but at what cost? If this tale of forbidden vaults and cursed books grips you, comment below with your thoughts on what Lorenzo should do next. Would you open that unholy book or seal the vault forever? Share your choice in the comments, and let's uncover the next chapter of this chilling saga. Chapter 11. The Rising Darkness. A frozen breath, exhaled from no living lung, curled like smoke across the frost-covered stones of Rome's ancient catacombs, chilling Father Lorenzo's skin as he descended into their depths. On a moonless night in October 1847, the air was thick with the stench of damp earth and decay, pierced by a faint metallic tang that clung to his throat. The Codex Sanctus Vacuus, clutched in his trembling hands, and the silver key with its serpent-entwined cross burned against his cassock, remnants of his harrowing escape from the forbidden vault where the Liber Tenebris had pulsed with unholy life. The blood-drained body of Brother Matteo, Cecilia's glowing eyes, and the guardian's scream, "The pact claims you," haunted him, driving him to these catacombs beneath the Vatican, where whispers of the hollow saint's curse were said to linger. The darkness seemed to pulse, alive with a malice that watched his every step. Lorenzo's lantern cast a trembling glow across the catacombs' walls, their surfaces etched with faded Christian symbols and bones stacked in silent vigil. The Codex had hinted that the Liber Tenebris held the ritual to break the hollow saint's pact, but its warnings of guardians' entities neither human nor demon echoed in his mind. The key, still warm in his pocket, had unlocked the vault, but the catacombs were a deeper labyrinth, rumored to hide the origins of Cecilia's curse. His crucifix felt heavy, its silver edges biting into his palm as he whispered a prayer, "Domini, custodi me," but the words were drowned by a low hum, like a chant from a forgotten mass, rising from the depths. The hum grew into a pulse, and the shadows on the walls stirred, forming shapes-robed figures, their eyes glowing with the same unholy light as Cecilia's. Lorenzo's heart pounded as he navigated the narrow passages, the bones seeming to shift, their empty sockets watching him. The Codex, open in his hands, revealed a passage, "In catacumbes, tenebrae surgunt, et sancti vacuo regnant." In the catacombs, darkness rises, and the hollow saints rule. It described how the catacombs were a nexus for the pact, where blood sacrifices had been offered to bind Cecilia and her kind. Historical echoes chilled him, a 13th-century Vatican record of a dark mass held in Rome's catacombs, dismissed as heresy, a 16th-century account of a priest found dead in these tunnels, his body marked with strange sigils, buried in secret. The Church had silenced these truths, but the pulsing shadows proved they lived. A sudden crack split the air, and the bones along the walls rattled, dust cascading like ash. The hum became a whisper, Cecilia's voice, cold and commanding, "Venice ad me, you come to me." Lorenzo's lantern flickered, its flame bending as if pressed by an unseen force. He traced a circle of holy water around himself, a desperate barrier, but the shadows surged, their glowing eyes closing in. The Codex had warned that the hollow saint's hunger grew with each sacrifice, and Matteo's death had awakened something greater. The air grew colder, and a faint red glow emanated from a tunnel ahead, where the bones formed an arch, their surfaces etched with the serpent-entwined cross. Lorenzo approached the arch, his breath catching as he saw a stone altar, its surface stained with dried blood, surrounded by flickering candles that burned without wicks. The Liber Tenebris lay open on the altar, its pages pulsing with a crimson light, as if alive. The Codex had promised it could break the pact, but at the cost of the seeker's soul. A drawing in the Codex showed a priest standing before an altar, his hands bloodied, surrounded by robed shadows. A Latin note warned, "Cave Fellis altar, beware the altar's call." Lorenzo's faith wavered. Was the Liber Tenebris his salvation, or a trap to bind him to Cecilia's curse? The shadows thickened, their whispers growing into a chant, "Sanguis tuus, your blood." The candles flared, illuminating the bones, which seemed to move, forming figures that stepped from the walls, their skeletal hands dripping with blood. Lorenzo's holy water sizzled on the floor, as if rejected by the catacombs. A new sound emerged, slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing from the tunnel behind, accompanied by a metallic clank, like a blade on stone. Lorenzo spun, his lantern barely piercing the gloom, but the footsteps were unmistakable, heavy with menace. The Codex had warned of guardians, but this felt like Cecilia herself, summoned by the altar's power. "In nomine Christi!" Lorenzo shouted, his voice trembling, but the footsteps grew closer, and a guttural laugh answered, chillingly familiar from the vault. The shadows chanted louder, Cecilia's voice leading them, "You cannot turn back." Lorenzo reached for the Liber Tenebris, its pages warm under his touch, but the altar pulsed, and the blood stain spread, lapping at his boots. The bones surged forward, their skeletal forms coalescing into a single figure robed, faceless, its eyes glowing with Cecilia's light, holding a chalice that dripped crimson. The chant became a scream, "The darkness rises." Lorenzo stumbled back, codex and key in hand, as the figure lunged, its chalice spilling blood that burned the stone. He fled toward the tunnel's exit, the scream chasing him, the bones rattling as if alive. As he reached the arch, a final glance revealed the figure raising the chalice, its eyes fixed on him, and the Liber Tenebris pulsing faster, as if calling him back. The catacombs shook, and the scream echoed, "You are part of us." Lorenzo ran into the storm, knowing the darkness was no longer confined to the Vatican, it was spreading. If this tale of rising shadows and cursed altars grips you, hit that subscribe button to follow Lorenzo's desperate fight. If you faced that blood-soaked altar, would you take the book or flee its call? Share your choice in the comments, and let's unravel this unholy horror together. Chapter 12. The Battle in the Catacombs. A skeletal hand, its bones gleaming with an unnatural sheen, burst through the catacomb floor, clawing at Father Lorenzo's boots as if the earth itself sought to drag him into its depths. In the suffocating darkness of Rome's ancient catacombs, on a storm-ravaged night in October 1847, the air was thick with the stench of decay and blood, the walls trembling with a pulse that echoed the hollow saint's curse. Lorenzo's lantern flickered wildly, casting jagged shadows across the bone-lined tunnels, the Codex Sanctus Vacuus clutched in his trembling hands. The memory of Cecilia's glowing eyes, Brother Matteo's rising corpse, and the Liber Tenebris's pulsing pages haunted him, their warnings of guardians and a spreading darkness now made real. The serpent-entwined key burned in his pocket, a relic of the vault that had led him back to these catacombs, where the Pact's heart lay. Lorenzo's crucifix felt like a lead weight, its silver edges biting into his palm as he stumbled through the labyrinth, the skeletal hand retreating into the earth with a guttural moan. The Codex had promised the Liber Tenebris could break the Hollow Saints' pact, but its warning the altar's call rang in his ears after the catacombs' bones had come alive. The air grew colder, the hum from the previous chamber now a deafening chant, Cecilia's voice leading a chorus of unseen saints, Sanguis tuus nos vocet, your blood calls us. Lorenzo's faith wavered, his Jesuit training crumbling against the horror before him. Historical echoes flooded his mind, a 14th-century Vatican record of a living crypt where bones moved, dismissed as demonic possession, a 16th-century chronicle of a priest lost in these tunnels, his remains found entwined with skeletal hands. The Church had buried these truths, but the catacombs were alive with their proof. He reached a vast chamber, its floor a mosaic of skulls, their empty sockets glinting under his lantern's light. At its center stood a stone altar, its surface etched with the serpent-entwined cross, stained with fresh blood that pulsed as if alive. The Liber Tenebris lay open on the altar, its pages glowing with crimson light, as if beckoning him. The Codex, still in his hands, revealed a passage, in altare, pugna incipit, sanguis contra sanguinum. At the altar, the battle begins, blood against blood. It described the ritual to confront the Hollow Saints, requiring a priest's faith to challenge their curse, but at the risk of his soul. Lorenzo's heart pounded. Was this his chance to end Cecilia's reign, or a trap to bind him to her pact? The chant grew louder, and the skulls in the mosaic shifted, their jaws opening as if to scream. Shadows surged from the walls, forming robed figures with glowing eyes, their hands dripping with blood. Lorenzo raised his crucifix, shouting, "In nomine Christi, recedite," but the shadows laughed, Cecilia's voice weaving through them, "Fides tua est mea, your faith is mine." He poured a circle of holy water around the altar, its contents sizzling on the stone, but the shadows pressed closer, their forms coalescing into a single figure robed, faceless, its eyes burning with Cecilia's light, holding a chalice that dripped crimson. A sudden crack split the air, and the altar trembled, blood spilling from its edges like a tide. The Liber Tenebris pulsed faster, its pages flipping to a ritual in Latin, a prayer to banish the Hollow Saints. Lorenzo's voice trembled as he began to chant, "Domini, per sanguinum tuum, libera nos, Lord, by your blood, deliver us." The shadows shrieked, their forms writhing, but the faceless figure lunged, its chalice spilling blood that burned the floor. Lorenzo's crucifix glowed, its light pushing the figure back, but the chant faltered as the skeletal hands burst from the floor again, clawing at his legs. The Codex warned that the ritual required a sacrifice, blood or faith to break the pact, and Lorenzo felt his soul teetering on the edge. A new sound emerged, heavy footsteps, echoing from the chamber's entrance, accompanied by a metallic clank, like a blade on stone. Lorenzo spun, his lantern catching a glint of silver, a robed figure, its face hidden, holding a second chalice, its eyes glowing with the same unholy light. The Codex had warned of guardians, but this felt like Cecilia herself, summoned by the ritual's power. The shadows chanted louder, "You cannot win." Lorenzo's chant grew desperate, his voice rising over the shrieks, but the skeletal hands tightened, drawing blood from his ankles. The Liber Tenebris glowed brighter, its pages burning his hands, as if demanding he finish the ritual. The faceless figure raised its chalice, and the blood tide surged, flooding the chamber. Lorenzo's crucifix flared, its light searing the shadows, but the figure laughed, its voice Cecilia's, "Your blood or your soul." He stumbled back, codex and crucifix in hand, as the altar cracked, revealing a void beneath, pulsing with crimson light. The chant became a scream, "Choose." Lorenzo fell to his knees, the ritual unfinished, knowing the battle had only begun. If this tale of living bones and unholy battles grips you, share it with a friend who dares to face the dark. If you stood before that altar, would you finish the ritual or flee its price? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's unravel this chilling saga together. Chapter 13. The Betrayal. A blood-soaked rosary, its beads glowing with an unnatural crimson light, dangled from the skeletal fingers of a shadowed figure, as if mocking the prayers it once served. In the labyrinthine catacombs beneath Rome, on a storm-ravaged night in October 1847, Father Lorenzo stood frozen, his lantern casting a trembling glow across the bone-strewn chamber. The Codex Sanctus Vacuus, clutched in his trembling hands, and the serpent-entwined key burned against his cassock, remnants of his desperate battle at the altar where the Liber Tenebris had pulsed with unholy life. The skeletal hands that clawed at him, Cecilia's glowing eyes, and the guardian's scream, "Your blood or your soul," haunted him, driving him deeper into the catacombs, where the hollow saint's curse was spreading. The air was thick with the stench of decay and blood, the walls pulsing with a rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of something ancient and malevolent. Lorenzo's crucifix felt like a shard of ice, its silver edges cutting into his palm as he navigated the bone-lined tunnels, the rosary's glow illuminating a figure ahead robed, its face hidden, but its presence chillingly familiar. The Codex had warned of guardians, but this figure was different, its movements deliberate, human, yet wrong. The battle at the altar had left him shaken, the Liber Tenebris' ritual unfinished, its demand for a sacrifice, blood or faith, still ringing in his ears. The rosary swung gently, its beads dripping blood that hissed on the stone floor, and Lorenzo's heart pounded as he recognized the figure's robes, those of a cardinal, one of the council he had sought to confront. The figure turned, revealing the face of Cardinal Bellarmine, the same who had warned him in the apostolic palace. But his eyes glowed with Cecilia's unholy light, and his smile was a twisted mockery of the holy man Lorenzo had known. "You should have burned the Codex, Father," Bellarmine rasped, his voice layered with Cecilia's whisper. "The pact requires loyalty." Lorenzo's breath caught, his faith crumbling as he realized the betrayal. Bellarmine was no guardian, he was a servant of the hollow saints, bound to their curse. Historical echoes flooded his mind, a 15th-century Vatican record of a cardinal vanishing after a dark rite in the catacombs, dismissed as heresy, a 17th-century chronicle of a high cleric found dead, his rosary stained with blood, buried in secret. The Church had hidden these betrayals, but Bellarmine's glowing eyes were proof of their truth. The Codex, open in Lorenzo's hands, revealed a passage, Proditer intra ecclesiam latet, sanguis eius pactum firmat. The betrayer hides within the Church, his blood seals the pact. It described how the hollow saint's curse relied on traitors, clerics who offered souls to sustain Cecilia's power. The rosary pulsed, and the shadows on the walls thickened, forming robed figures with glowing eyes, their hands dripping with blood. Lorenzo raised his crucifix, shouting, "In nomine Christi, recede," but Bellarmine laughed, the sound echoing with Cecilia's voice, "Fides tua est mea, your faith is mine." A sudden crack split the air, and the bones along the walls surged, forming skeletal hands that clawed at Lorenzo's legs. His lantern flickered, its flame bending as if suffocated by the darkness. He poured a circle of holy water around himself, but the blood from the rosary sizzled through it, as if mocking his faith. The Codex had warned that the pact grew stronger with each sacrifice, and Matteo's death had been only the beginning. Bellarmine stepped closer, the rosary swinging, its beads forming a symbol on the floor, a serpent-entwined cross. "The Council has always known," he hissed. "We feed the saints to protect the Church." Lorenzo's mind raced, recalling the Liber Tenebris' ritual to break the pact, requiring a priest's blood or soul. Was Bellarmine's betrayal the key to its power? The shadows chanted, Cecilia's voice leading them, "Proditer es, you are the betrayer." The bones tightened, drawing blood from Lorenzo's ankles, and his crucifix glowed, its light pushing the shadows back, but Bellarmine raised the rosary, its crimson light flaring. A new sound emerged, slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing from the chamber's depths, accompanied by a metallic clank, like a chain on stone. Lorenzo spun, his lantern catching a glint of silver. A second figure, robed, its face hidden, holding a chalice that dripped blood. The chant became a scream, "You are bound to us." Lorenzo's voice faltered as he chanted the ritual from the Liber Tenebris, "Domini, per sanguinem tuum, libera nos." The shadows shrieked, but Bellarmine laughed, his eyes glowing brighter. The skeletal hands surged, pinning Lorenzo to the ground, and the second figure stepped into the light, its chalice spilling blood that burned the stone. The scream echoed, "Your soul seals it." Lorenzo clutched the codex, his crucifix flaring, but the catacombs shook, and a crack split the floor, revealing a void beneath, pulsing with crimson light. He was trapped, betrayed by the Church he served, with no escape. If this tale of unholy betrayal and living bones grips you, hit that like button to join Lorenzo's desperate fight. If you faced that traitor cardinal, would you confront his lies or flee his curse? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's unravel this chilling saga together. Chapter 14. The Final Exorcism. A forbidden curse, carved into Father Lorenzo's palm by the searing heat of the serpent-entwined key, pulsed with a crimson glow, binding him to a ritual he could no longer escape. In the bone-strewn heart of Rome's catacombs, on a storm-ravaged night in October 1847, the air was thick with the stench of blood and decay, the walls trembling with the hollow saint's unholy power. Lorenzo's lantern flickered, casting jagged shadows across the skeletal remains, the Codex Sanctus Vacuus and Liber Tenebris clutched in his trembling hands. The betrayal of Cardinal Bellarmine, the blood-soaked rosary, and the rising darkness of Cecilia's curse haunted him, their screams, "Your soul seals it," driving him to this final stand. The catacombs pulsed like a living thing, and the curse on his palm burned, marking him as the pact's next sacrifice. Lorenzo's crucifix glowed faintly, its silver edges biting into his other hand as he stood before a stone altar, its surface etched with the serpent-entwined cross, slick with fresh blood. The Codex had warned that the Liber Tenebris held the ritual to break the Hollow Saints' pact, but Cardinal Bellarmine's treachery revealed the cost: a priest's blood or soul. The catacombs shook, bones rattling along the walls, their empty sockets glinting as if alive. Historical echoes chilled Lorenzo, a 14th-century Vatican record of a final rite in the catacombs, where a priest vanished, his remains found bloodless, a 16th-century chronicle of an exorcism gone wrong, sealed by papal decree. The Church had buried these failures, but the curse on Lorenzo's palm was proof they lived. The Liber Tenebris lay open on the altar, its pages glowing with crimson light, revealing a Latin exorcism: per sanguinem et fidem, frange pactum, by blood and faith, break the pact. Lorenzo's voice trembled as he began the chant, each word searing his throat like fire. The catacombs roared, and the bones surged, forming skeletal figures that clawed at the air. Shadows thickened, their glowing eyes Cecilia's eyes burning through the gloom. In nomine Christi, Lorenzo shouted, raising his crucifix, but the shadows laughed, Cecilia's voice weaving through them: sanguis tuus est meus, your blood is mine. A sudden crack split the air, and the altar bled, crimson streams pooling at Lorenzo's feet. The curse on his palm flared, drawing blood that dripped onto the Liber Tenebris, its pages drinking it like a living thing. The chant grew louder, Lorenzo's voice rising over the shadow's shrieks, but the skeletal figures lunged, their bony hands tearing at his cassock. The Codex had warned that the exorcism required a sacrifice, and Lorenzo felt his faith faltering, his soul teetering on the edge. Historical whispers echoed: a 15th-century priest who attempted the same rite, found dead with a serpent cross burned into his flesh, a 17th-century exorcist whose screams echoed through Rome, silenced by the Church. Was Lorenzo doomed to join them? The shadows coalesced into a single figure robed, faceless, its eyes glowing with Cecilia's light, holding a chalice that spilled blood like a fountain. The curse on Lorenzo's palm pulsed faster, binding him to the ritual. He chanted louder, Domini, libera nos, but the figure laughed, its voice Cecilia's, Fides tuami liberat, your faith frees me. The catacombs shook, and the altar cracked, revealing a void beneath, pulsing with crimson light, as if the pact itself lived within. Lorenzo's crucifix flared, its light searing the shadows, but the skeletal hands tightened, drawing more blood from his wounds. A new sound emerged: heavy footsteps, echoing from the chamber's entrance, accompanied by a metallic clank, like a blade on stone. Lorenzo spun, his lantern catching a glint of silver. Cardinal Bellarmine, his eyes still glowing with Cecilia's light, holding a second chalice. You cannot break it, Bellarmine hissed, his voice layered with Cecilia's. The pact is eternal. The shadows chanted, their voices a deafening scream, your soul or the world. Lorenzo's chant faltered, the curse on his palm burning brighter, his blood now flooding the altar. The Liber Tenebris glowed, its pages flipping to a final warning: cave felis pretium, beware the price. The void beneath the altar widened, and a figure emerged: Saint Cecilia, her body preserved, her glowing eyes fixed on Lorenzo, her blood-stained lips curling into a smile. The chant became a scream: you are mine. Lorenzo's crucifix shattered, its pieces falling into the blood tide, and the shadows surged, pinning him to the altar. He screamed the final words of the exorcism, per sanguinem tuum, frange, and the catacombs roared, the void pulsing as if alive. Cecilia lunged, her hands reaching for his heart, but the liber tenebris flared, its light blinding, and the shadows shrieked, dissolving into ash. The altar collapsed, sealing the void, but a new scream echoed, deeper, darker, as if something greater had been unleashed. Lorenzo fell to his knees, bloodied and broken, the codex and liber tenebris at his side, the curse on his palm still glowing. The catacombs were silent, but the air felt heavier, as if the pact had shifted, not broken. If this tale of cursed rituals and unholy battles grips you, comment below with your thoughts on what Lorenzo unleashed. If you faced Cecilia's final curse, would you finish the exorcism or let the darkness take you? Share your choice in the comments, and let's unravel this chilling saga together. Chapter 15. The Aftermath. A shattered crucifix, its silver fragments scattered across the catacomb floor, glowed faintly with a fading light, as if mourning the faith it could no longer protect. In the suffocating darkness of Rome's ancient catacombs, on a storm-ravaged night in October 1847, Father Lorenzo knelt, bloodied and broken, amidst the ruins of the altar where he had waged his final exorcism. The Codex Sanctus Vacuus lay torn beside him, its pages singed by the crimson void that had sealed shut, and the Liber Tenebris was reduced to ash, its ritual completed at a cost he could barely comprehend. The memory of Saint Cecilia's lunge, her glowing eyes, and the scream "You are mine," still echoed, but the deeper, darker cry that followed, as if something greater had been unleashed, chilled him to his core. The air was thick with the stench of blood and ash, the silence heavy with the weight of a battle won or lost. Lorenzo's hands trembled, the serpent-entwined key now cold in his pocket, its curse faded but its mark still burned into his palm. The catacombs were still, the skeletal hands and robed shadows gone, but the walls seemed to watch, their bones glinting with an unnatural sheen. The exorcism had shattered Cecilia's hold, her form dissolving into ash with the Liber Tenebris, but the final scream suggested a greater force had escaped the void. Historical echoes haunted him, a 14th-century Vatican record of a crypt sealed after an exorcism, its priests vanishing without trace, a 16th-century chronicle of a dark awakening in Rome, dismissed as heresy but buried in secret. The Church had hidden these aftermaths, but Lorenzo's scars, physical and spiritual, were proof they lived. He stumbled to his feet, his cassock torn, his faith a fragile thread. The Codex, though damaged, revealed a final passage, Pactum frangitur, sed tenebrae manant. The pact is broken, but the darkness remains. It warned that breaking the hollow saint's curse could unleash a worse evil, one the Vatican had feared for centuries. Lorenzo's mind raced, recalling Cardinal Bellarmine's betrayal, Matteo's blood-drained body, and the countless sacrifices hidden by the Church. Had his exorcism freed the world, or doomed it? The catacombs felt heavier, as if the darkness had seeped into the stones, waiting to rise again. A faint hum broke the silence, not Cecilia's voice but something deeper, a low pulse that vibrated through the earth. Lorenzo's lantern flickered, its flame bending as if pressed by an unseen hand. He gathered the Codex's remnants, their pages crumbling like ash, and scrawled a warning in his own blood: "The darkness is not dead." He hid the fragments in a niche among the bones, a message for those who might follow. The hum grew louder, and the walls trembled, dust cascading like tears. Lorenzo's crucifix was gone, its light extinguished, but he whispered a prayer, Domini, salva nos, clinging to the hope that his sacrifice had not been in vain. A sudden crack split the air, and the catacomb floor shuddered, a faint red glow seeping from the cracks. The hum became a whisper, not Cecilia's but a chorus of unfamiliar voices, chanting in a tongue he didn't know. Shadows stirred, their forms indistinct but menacing, their eyes glowing with a new light, not Cecilia's, but something older, hungrier. The Codex had warned of a greater evil, and Lorenzo's heart sank as he realized his exorcism had opened a door he could not close. Historical whispers echoed, a 15th century account of a new darkness rising after an exorcism, sealed by papal order, a 17th century record of a crypt where shadows moved, dismissed as madness. The Church had buried these truths, but they were awakening. A new sound emerged, slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing from the catacombs entrance, accompanied by a metallic clank, like a chain on stone. Lorenzo spun, his lantern barely piercing the gloom, but the footsteps were unmistakable, heavy with purpose. The Codex had warned of guardians, but this felt like something new, summoned by the void's opening. In nomine Christi, he shouted, his voice breaking, but the footsteps grew closer, and a guttural laugh answered, chillingly unfamiliar. The shadows chanted louder, their voices a deafening scream, it begins again. Lorenzo fled toward the catacombs exit, the Codex fragments left behind, his bloodied warning his only legacy. The hum pursued him, seeping into his bones, and the red glow brightened, as if the darkness was rising to claim Rome. He stumbled into the storm, the Vatican looming above, its spires silent witnesses to the horror he'd unleashed. If this tale of shattered faith and rising darkness grips you, share it with a friend who dares to face the truth. If you found that bloodied warning, would you heed it or seek the darkness it foretold? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's unravel the final chapter of this chilling saga. Chapter 16. The Eternal Question. A crimson mist rose from Rome's ancient streets, curling through the shadows of St. Peter's Square, as if the city itself bled from the wounds of Father Lorenzo's shattered faith. On a storm-ravaged dawn in October 1847, Lorenzo staggered from the catacombs, his cassock torn, his hands bloodied, the Codex Sanctus Vacuus reduced to fragments hidden among the bones below. The final exorcism had broken Saint Cecilia's hold, her form dissolving into ash, but the deeper scream that followed, a primal roar from the void, haunted him, a sign that something greater had been unleashed. The air was thick with the stench of blood and ash, the silence broken by a distant hum, like a chant from an unseen choir, echoing across the Vatican's spires. Lorenzo's eyes, hollow with exhaustion, scanned the square, its cobblestones glinting under the first light of dawn, as if stained with the blood of his battle. The serpent-entwined key, now cold in his pocket, felt like a relic of a war he hadn't won. The Liber Tenebris was gone, its ritual completed, but the Codex's final warning, the darkness remains, burned in his mind. He had left a bloodied note in the catacombs, a warning for those who might follow, but the hum grew louder, seeping from the city's underbelly. Historical echoes chilled him, a 15th century Vatican record of a red mist rising after an exorcism, dismissed as a plague omen, a 17th century chronicle of a priest who fled Rome, claiming the city was cursed, his warnings buried by the Church. The Vatican had hidden these truths, but Lorenzo's scars, physical and spiritual, were proof they lived. He stumbled toward the basilica, its dome looming like a silent judge. The Codex had warned that breaking the Hollow Saints' Pact could unleash a greater evil, one the Church had feared for centuries. Lorenzo's faith was a fragile thread, frayed by Cardinal Bellarmine's betrayal, Matteo's blood-drained corpse, and Cecilia's glowing eyes. Had his exorcism saved Rome, or damned it? The mist thickened, curling around the obelisk in the square, its shadows forming fleeting shapes, robed figures, their eyes glowing with a new light, not Cecilia's but something older, hungrier. The hum became a whisper, a chorus of unfamiliar voices. It lives. Lorenzo's heart pounded as he entered the basilica, seeking refuge in its sacred halls, but the air inside was heavy, the candles flickering as if starved of oxygen. He knelt before the altar, his bloodied hands trembling, and whispered a prayer, Domini, quid est veritas? Lord, what is truth? The words felt hollow, drowned by the growing hum. The mist followed him, seeping through the basilica's doors, its crimson tendrils curling around the pews. Historical whispers echoed, a 14th century account of a blood mist in Rome, blamed on demonic forces but sealed by papal decree, a 16th century record of a priest who saw shadows in the basilica, his writings burned. The Church had buried these signs, but they were rising again. A sudden crack split the air, and the altar trembled, its marble surface pulsing with a faint red glow. The whisper grew louder, now a chant, "You freed it." Lorenzo's lantern flickered, its flame bending as if pressed by an unseen hand. He clutched the fragments of the Codex, their pages crumbling, and saw a final inscription, scrawled in his own blood, Cave Felis Novum, beware the new. The mist surged, forming a figure robed, faceless, its eyes glowing with a light that dwarfed Cecilia's, its presence suffocating. The chant became a scream, "It begins in Paris." Lorenzo stumbled back, his faith shattered, as the figure vanished, leaving the basilica silent but heavy with dread. The mist retreated, but the hum lingered, echoing beyond Rome's borders. He knew the darkness had not died, it had spread, seeking new ground. Historical records whispered of a 17th century exorcism in Paris, where a cathedral was sealed after a Red Awakening, its truth buried by the Church. Lorenzo's warning in the catacombs was his only legacy, but would it be enough? He fell to his knees, the basilica's spires looming above, knowing the eternal question remained: if the Church's holiest saints were its darkest curse, what was holiness itself? The hum faded, but the air felt heavier, as if the darkness watched, waiting. Lorenzo rose, his bloodied hands trembling, and stepped into the dawn, the Vatican silent behind him. If this tale of crimson mists and eternal questions grips you, hit that subscribe button to follow the darkness beyond Rome. If you found Lorenzo's warning, would you chase the new evil to Paris or let it lie? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's unravel the final mystery together.